The sentence hung in the air, like the smoke from a blown-out candle, acrid and suffocating. "It's not your business where I go." Elena didn't just say it, she weaponized it. Her voice, usually a polished alto refined by years of boardroom negotiations and gallery openings, shredded into a shriek that bounced off the minimalist concrete walls of their downtown Seattle penthouse. Lucas stood by the kitchen island, his hand frozen halfway to the granite countertop, a wet dishcloth gripping the rim of a wine glass. He didn't drop the glass. He didn't throw it. He simply set it down, very carefully, ensuring the base made no sound against the stone. That was Lucas. Architecture and human form. Structure, stability, silence. He looked at his wife. She was a vision of chaotic beauty. Her red dress, the one with the back cut scandalously low, clung to her frame like a second skin. She was trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of a lie finally spoken aloud, or perhaps the sheer exertion of tearing herself away from him. Her lipstick was a shade too dark for a casual dinner with clients, and the diamond earrings he had bought her for their 5th anniversary caught the recessed lighting, mocking him with their sparkle. "Elena," Lucas said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. It was the voice of a man who had checked the structural integrity of a bridge and found a fatal crack. "It's 11:30 at night. You smell like Guerlain in anticipation. Don't insult my intelligence." "I'm not doing this, Lucas. I am not doing this with you right now," she snapped, grabbing her clutch from the entryway table. Her fingers fumbled with the latch, a minute betrayal of her composure. "You've been suffocating me for months, staring at me, analyzing me like I'm one of your blueprints that doesn't quite add up. You don't add up, Elle. Stop it." She spun around, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood. "I am going out. I need air. I need space. If you trust me so little, that's your problem, not mine." "I trusted you until you started changing your phone password weekly," Lucas replied, leaning against the counter, crossing his arms. He felt a cold numbness spreading from his chest to his fingertips. "I trusted you until you started having emergency PR crises every Tuesday and Friday night." Elena's face hardened. The mask of the aggrieved wife slipped, revealing the contempt beneath. It was a look Lucas had seen her give to waiters who messed up her order or artists who missed a deadline, but never to him. Until recently. "I'm leaving," she declared, turning to the heavy oak door. "If you walk out that door," Lucas said, his voice dropping an octave, devoid of threat but heavy with finality, "don't expect it to be open when you come back." She paused. Her hand hovered over the brass handle. For a second, the silence stretched, taut as a violin string about to snap. Lucas watched the muscles in her back tense up. He waited for the hesitation, for the apology, for the realization that she was standing on a precipice. Instead, she laughed. It was a brittle, short sound. "God, you're so dramatic. It's not your business where I go, Lucas. Get a life of your own and stop obsessing over mine." The door opened. The sound of the rain outside, a relentless Seattle downpour, rushed in, bringing with it the smell of wet asphalt and ozone. Then, the door slammed. The sound was final. It vibrated through the floorboards, traveling up through Lucas's feet and settling in the pit of his stomach. He didn't chase her. That wasn't who he was. In the movies, the husband runs to the elevator, blocking the doors with a desperate hand, begging for a second chance. In reality, Lucas walked to the window. He pressed his forehead against the cool, floor-to-ceiling glass and looked down at the street, 18 stories below. Minutes later, he saw her, a small red figure under the awning, opening a black umbrella. A car pulled up, not a taxi, not an Uber, a sleek charcoal sedan, a BMW. Lucas didn't recognize the car, but he recognized the way Elena moved towards it. There was an urgency to her gait, a hunger. She got in. The car merged into the river of red taillights bleeding into the rainy night. Lucas remained at the window long after the car had disappeared. The apartment was massive, filled with tasteful mid-century furniture and art they had collected together in Paris and New York. Now it felt like a mausoleum. He turned back to the kitchen. The wine glass was still there. He picked it up, washed it, dried it, and placed it in the cabinet. He wiped the counter. He straightened the rug. He went to the bedroom, the king-size bed looking vast and empty. On her side of the vanity, a capped tube of lipstick lay on its side, left in haste. He stood it upright. He lay down on top of the covers, fully clothed. He didn't turn on the TV. He didn't check his email. He just stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows of the rain droplets traverse the plaster like tears. He checked his watch. 11:45 p.m. She was with him now, whoever he was. Lucas closed his eyes, forcing his mind to shut down the forensic reconstruction of what was happening across town. He focused on his breathing. In, out. In, out. He eventually drifted into a shallow, fitful doze, the kind where the mind is still half awake, listening for the turn of a key that he knew wouldn't come. The hours dragged by, marked only by the periodic hum of the refrigerator and the wind howling against the glass. Midnight. 1 a.m. 2 a.m. Then, the silence shattered. It was 2:17 a.m. His phone, resting on the nightstand, began to buzz violently against the wood. The screen lit up the dark room with a harsh, blinding white light. Lucas jolted awake, heart hammering against his ribs. He squinted at the screen. Elena. He stared at it. Was she calling to apologize? To lie? To tell him she wasn't coming home? He felt a surge of anger and reached out to decline the call. Let her go to voicemail. Let her feel the rejection she had served him. The buzzing stopped. 2 seconds later, it started again. Elena. Lucas frowned. He sat up, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed. He watched the phone dance towards the edge of the table. It stopped. Immediately, it started again. Elena. Something was wrong. The rhythm was frantic. This wasn't a drunk dial. This wasn't a butt dial. He picked it up on the fourth ring, but his thumb hovered over the green icon. He was still angry. The echo of her scream, "It's not your business," was still ringing in his ears. The call ended before he could answer. Then again. And again. By the time he unlocked the screen, he saw the notifications stacking up like dominoes. 18 missed calls. All in the last 2 minutes. And then a text message notification popped up. It wasn't a sentence. It wasn't an explanation. It was a pin location. Dropped pin near Snoqualmie Pass, 40 miles east of the city. In the mountains, in a snowstorm. A voicemail icon appeared. Lucas pressed play, bringing the phone to his ear, his hand trembling slightly. For the first 3 seconds, there was only the sound of wind, a roaring, tearing wind that sounded like the end of the world, and then the sound that chilled Lucas's blood to absolute zero. It was Elena, but it wasn't the defiant woman who had slammed the door 3 hours ago. It was the sound of a small, terrified animal trapped in a cage. Lucas, oh God, Lucas, he left me. I can't feel my legs. Please. The recording cut off with the screeching sound of metal groaning under stress. Lucas stood up, the phone gripped so tight his knuckles turned white. The anger evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. The architect in him took over. There was a disaster. He needed to secure the site. He grabbed his keys. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made them slick. Elena sat behind the wheel of the charcoal BMW, her hands gripping the leather at 10 and 2 so tightly that her knuckles turned a color of old ivory. The heater was blasting, fighting the chill that had settled deep in her marrow, but she couldn't stop shivering. She was 10 miles out of the city, heading east on I-90, leaving the glittering skyline behind in the rearview mirror. Every mile put distance between her and the suffocation of the penthouse, between her and Lucas's calm, judgmental stare. "It's not your business where I go." The words replayed in her head, looping like a broken record. She tasted bile. She hadn't meant to scream it quite like that. It was ugly, unrefined. But Lucas, God, Lucas had a way of making her feel small without ever raising his voice. He was so perfect, so steady, so architectural. He was a load-bearing wall in a house she no longer wanted to live in. She glanced at the passenger seat. Her phone lay there, face down. She knew Lucas wouldn't call. He wasn't the type to blow up her phone. At least, not yet. He was probably cleaning the kitchen counter right now, wiping away the invisible bacteria of their argument. "You deserve this, Alina," she whispered to the empty car. "You deserve to feel alive." She needed to believe that. She needed to believe that Julian was the answer to the question her soul had been asking for 2 years. Julian was different. He was a photographer, messy, impulsive, smelling of developer chemicals and expensive tobacco. He didn't care about retirement funds or structural integrity. He cared about light, shadow, and the curve of her neck. He made her feel like a muse, not a wife. The highway began to climb, the lights of the suburbs thinning out into the encroaching darkness of the Cascades. The rain turned heavier, transforming into sleet that slapped against the windshield like handfuls of gravel. She turned up the radio, drowning out the storm with a thumping bass line, trying to recapture the thrill she usually felt on these drives. Usually this was the best part, the shedding of Mrs. Vance, the emergence of Elena. But tonight the transformation felt sluggish. The adrenaline was soured by guilt. Lucas's final words haunted her. "Don't expect it to be open when you come back." He had never threatened her before. That was new. It terrified her, more than she admitted. 40 minutes later, she turned off the highway onto the winding service road that led to Julian's cabin near Snoqualmie Pass. The road was treacherous, a ribbon of black ice and mud flanked by towering pines that loomed like sentinels. The BMW's tires crunched over the gravel driveway. The cabin was dark. Elena frowned. Julian knew she was coming. He usually left the porch light on, a beacon in the wilderness. Tonight, the structure was a shadow against the trees. She parked and killed the engine. The silence of the mountains rushed in, heavy and oppressive. She grabbed her overnight bag, just a change of clothes and a silk robe, and stepped out. Her heels sank into the mud. Ruined. "Julian?" she called out, her voice snatched away by the wind. She found the key under the mat, a cliché he insisted on, and let herself in. The air was stale, smelling of wood smoke and something metallic. It was cold. "Julian?" "In here," a voice drifted from the living room. Alina walked in. Julian was sitting in the oversized leather armchair facing the unlit fireplace. He held a tumbler of whiskey in one hand, his camera resting on the floor beside him. He didn't stand up. He didn't turn around. "You're late," he said. His voice lacked the usual warmth, the velvety texture that usually made her knees weak. "It was the traffic," Elena said, dropping her bag. She walked over to him, expecting an embrace. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "And Lucas, we had a fight. A big one." Julian took a sip of his drink, staring into the cold ashes of the fireplace. He shrugged her hand off. A small movement, casual, but it stung like a slap. "I told you, Elena. I don't do drama. I don't do husband problems." Elena froze. The cold from the drive seemed to seep into her bones. "Julian, I left him tonight. I walked out." She waited for him to react, to smile, to tell her she was brave, that they could finally be together without the shadows. Julian finally turned his head. In the dim light, his handsome face looked sharp, predatory. His eyes, usually full of artistic appreciation,
were glazed with indifference.
You left him? Julian let out a short, humorless laugh. That was stupid. What? Elena took a step back. We had a good thing, Elle, Julian said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. A fun thing. You were the bored rich housewife. I was the bohemian escape. It worked because you went home at the end of the weekend. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Elena's feet. I thought, you said you loved me. You said Lucas didn't understand me. I say a lot of things to get the shot, babe. Julian stood up, stretching his back. He looked at her not with desire, but with annoyance, like she was an appointment that had run over time. Look, I have a shoot in Vancouver tomorrow morning. Early. You can crash here if you want, but you can't stay. And you definitely can't bring your divorce baggage into my studio. Elena stared at him. The illusion dissolved. The artistic genius, the passionate lover, he was gone. In his place stood a narcissist in a flannel shirt who used women like disposable lens filters. She felt a wave of nausea. She had blown up her life for this. She had screamed at Lucas, the man who once held her hair back while she vomited from food poisoning, the man who knew exactly how she took her coffee, for this. You're disgusting, she whispered. I'm honest, Julian countered, walking toward the kitchen to refill his drink. Go home, Elena. Beg the architect to take you back. He looks like the forgiving type. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through her. It was humiliating. It was devastating. She grabbed her bag. I am leaving. Drive safe, Julian called out dismissively, the clink of glass on glass punctuating his words. Roads are slick. Elena ran out. She didn't care about the mud ruining her shoes. She didn't care about the freezing rain soaking her dress. She just needed to get away. Away from the mistake. Away from the shame. She threw herself into the driver's seat of the BMW and slammed the door, locking it as if Julian might chase her. He didn't. The cabin remained dark and silent. She started the car, her hands shaking so hard she could barely shift gears. She reversed aggressively, tires spinning in the slush, and gunned it down the driveway. Tears blurred her vision, hot and stinging. She wiped them away furiously, smearing mascara across her cheeks. Stupid, she sobbed. Stupid, stupid, stupid. She reached the service road and turned left, back toward the highway. But she was driving too fast. Much too fast for the conditions. Her mind was back in the penthouse, replaying the look on Lucas's face when she slammed the door. The quiet resignation. He knew, she realized. He always knew I wasn't worth it. A sharp curve loomed ahead. The curve ahead 25 mph sign flashed past in a yellow blur. Elena was doing 50. She tapped the brakes. The car didn't slow down. The tires lost their grip on the black ice. The rear end of the BMW swung out wildly to the right. Elena gasped, instantly overcorrecting. The car spun. The world became a kaleidoscope of dark trees, rain-slashed glass, and headlights cutting through the void. Thud. The car clipped the guardrail. Metal screamed against metal. Crash. The momentum carried the vehicle over the edge of the embankment. For a terrifying second, there was weightlessness. Then a series of bone-jarring impacts as the car rolled down the slope, crashing through saplings and brush. Glass shattered. The airbags deployed with the force of a cannon shot, punching the breath out of her. When the motion finally stopped, the silence was absolute. Elena hung upside down, held by her seatbelt. The smell of deployed airbags, like burnt gunpowder, filled the small space. Pain radiated from her left leg, a sharp, hot agony that made her scream. Julian, she whimpered. She fumbled for her phone. It had flown out of her purse. She felt around the roof of the car, which was now the floor, and her fingers brushed against the cold glass screen. She grabbed it. The screen was cracked but glowing. 2:16 a.m. She dialed Julian. It rang once, twice, sent to voicemail. She dialed again. Voicemail. He wasn't coming. He didn't care. The pain in her leg was getting worse, turning into a numbing cold. She looked out the shattered window. Darkness. Snow. No one would see her down here. Panic set in. Real, primal panic. She scrolled through her contacts. Her thumb hovered over Mom? No, she couldn't. Sarah? No. Her thumb moved to Lucas. The shame was heavier than the car crushing her. Calling him was the ultimate admission of failure. It was admitting he was right. It was admitting she was broken. But she didn't want to die. 2:17 a.m. She pressed call. Ring, ring, ring. He didn't answer. She dialed again. And again. Panic rising in her throat. Choking. Pick up. Pick up. Please pick up. She sent the location pin. She dialed again. This time voicemail picked up. Lucas's voice, calm and steady. You've reached Lucas Vance. Leave a message. Lucas, she sobbed into the receiver, her voice breaking. Lucas, oh, God. Lucas. He left me. I can't feel my legs. Please. The phone slipped from her blood-slicked fingers as a wave of darkness washed over her.
Lucas drove his Volvo XC90 like a weapon. The SUV cut through the deluge on I-90, its headlights carving twin tunnels of illumination into the suffocating blackness. The wipers thrashed against the windshield. Thwack, thwack, thwack. A metronome keeping time with the frantic rhythm of his heart. He was doing 80 in a 60 zone, hydroplaning over patches of standing water, his hands gripping the wheel with a precision that bordered on violence. The GPS on the dashboard glowed with a singular, unblinking red dot. Arrival, 28 minutes. Too long. Lucas reached for the Bluetooth dialer on the steering wheel. Call 911. The operator's voice was calm, detached. 911, what is your emergency? My wife, Lucas said. His voice sounded foreign to his own ears, hollow, stripped of inflection. She's been in an accident. Off the service road near exit 52. Snoqualmie Pass. I have her GPS coordinates. Sir, we have reports of a vehicle off the embankment in that area. Units are being dispatched, but the weather is grounding the airlift. Is she conscious? I don't know, Lucas lied. He didn't want to explain the voicemail. He didn't want to explain the 18 calls. He just wanted them to move faster. He ended the call. The silence rushed back in, louder than the storm. She left me. The phrase from the voicemail played on a loop in his mind, dissecting him with surgical precision. It wasn't just that she was with someone. He had known that. He had smelled the foreign cologne on her coats, seen the receipts for lunches 2 hours from her office. He had built a silent tolerance to the infidelity, treating it like a structural flaw in a building that could be managed with reinforcements. But this was different. He left me. The lover, the man she had dressed up for, the man she had screamed to protect had abandoned her in a wreck. The realization brought a wave of nausea so potent, Lucas had to swallow hard to keep from retching. Elena had traded his loyalty for a coward. The road began to incline, the rain turning into a heavy, wet sleet that plastered the windshield. The world outside was a blur of gray and black, devoid of landmarks. Lucas focused on the mechanics of driving. Downshift, ease off the gas, correct the slide. He was an architect. He understood forces, gravity, friction, momentum. Right now, they were all conspiring to keep him from her. Why am I doing this? The thought intruded, unbidden. She had told him to get a life. She had walked out. By all rights, he should be at home, asleep, letting the consequences of her choices play out. That would be justice. But love, Lucas realized as he drifted around a semi-truck spraying a wall of mist, wasn't about justice. It was about the inability to amputate a part of yourself even when it was gangrenous. The exit approached. He swerved off the highway, the tires crunching onto the unplowed service road. The SUV fishtailed, the traction control light flashing frantically on the dash. He wrestled it back into line. The GPS announced, "You have arrived." There was nothing here. Just a dark stretch of road flanked by dense forest and a steep drop-off on the right.
Lucas slowed to a crawl, rolling down his window. The freezing wind bit his face, stinging his eyes. He squinted into the dark.
Then he saw it. The guardrail was twisted outward, a jagged tear in the metal ribbon. Several young pine trees beyond it were snapped in half, their pale innards exposed like broken bones. Lucas slammed the car into park and killed the engine. He grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out. The silence of the mountains was gone, replaced by the howling wind. The ground was a sheet of ice. He moved toward the edge of the embankment, his dress shoes slipping on the treacherous surface. He shined the beam down into the abyss. It cut through the sleet, illuminating the chaotic trail of destruction, flattened bushes, gouged earth. And there, about 50 feet down, resting precariously against the trunk of a massive fir tree, was the BMW. It was a mangled heap of charcoal metal. The roof was caved in on the passenger side. One headlight was still flickering, a weak, strobe-like pulse in the dark. "Elena!" Lucas screamed. The wind tore the name from his throat and scattered it. No answer. He didn't think. He didn't assess the risk. He swung his legs over the broken guardrail and began to descend. It wasn't a climb. It was a controlled fall. He slid down the mud and ice, tearing his suit trousers, scraping his palms against rocks and roots. He lost his footing, tumbling 10 feet before slamming his shoulder into a tree. Pain exploded in his arm, hot and white, but he pushed off, ignoring it. He reached the car. The smell of gasoline was heavy in the air, a terrifying scent. "Elena!" He scrambled to the driver's side. The window was shattered. He shone the light inside. She was there, hanging upside down, suspended by the seatbelt. Her hair, usually so perfectly styled, hung in blood-matted clumps. Her face was pale, ghostly white in the harsh LED beam, streaked with mascara and blood. Her eyes were closed. "Elle," Lucas whispered, his voice cracking. He reached through the broken window, his hand shaking as he touched her cheek. It was cold. Her eyelids fluttered. She groaned, a low, guttural sound of pain that was the most beautiful thing Lucas had ever heard. "Lucas?" she rasped, barely audible. "I'm here," he said, leaning closer, rain dripping from his nose onto her forehead. Her eyes opened fully, struggling to focus. When she saw him, a look of profound confusion crossed her face, followed immediately by a spasm of shame so raw it made Lucas look away. "You came?" she whispered. Tears welled up, mixing with the blood on her temples. I didn't think you would come." "Don't talk," Lucas commanded, his voice shifting into crisis mode. He examined the door. It was jammed shut, the metal buckled. "I need to get you out. Can you feel your legs?" "No," she sobbed, panic rising again. "I can't. It's cold, Lucas. It's so cold." "Listen to me." He grabbed her hand, squeezing it hard. "The ambulance is coming. I can hear the sirens." He couldn't, but she needed to hear it. "But I need to get this door open. It's going to be loud." He braced his foot against the B-pillar and gripped the handle with both hands. He pulled, screaming with the effort, his muscles straining, the veins in his neck bulging. The metal groaned, resisting him. "She screamed at you," a dark voice in his head whispered. "She left you." Lucas gritted his teeth and pulled harder, channeling every ounce of his anger, every ounce of his betrayal into the physical exertion. He wasn't saving his wife. He was fighting the universe that tried to take her away before he could decide if he wanted to keep her. With a screech of tearing metal, the door popped open. Lucas fell back into the mud, gasping for air. He scrambled up instantly. Okay. He reached in to unbuckle her. As he leaned over her, his face inches from hers, he smelled it. Beneath the gasoline and the blood. Not his, not hers. Him. Lucas froze for a split second, his hand on the red release button of the seatbelt. He looked at Elena. She was watching him, her eyes wide with fear. as if she expected him to leave her there now that he had smelled the truth. "Please," she begged. Lucas closed his eyes for a heartbeat, exhaling a plume of white vapor. Then he pressed the button.
The seatbelt retracted with a sharp snap, and gravity reclaimed Elena instantly. She didn't fall gracefully. She collapsed like a structure whose foundation had finally given way. Lucas caught her, but the awkward angle and the mud beneath his feet sent them both lurching against the shattered dashboard. Elena screamed, a raw, tearing sound that cut through the storm and lodged itself deep in Lucas's chest. "I've got you," Lucas grunted, his arms wrapping around her waist and shoulders. He braced himself against the steering column, absorbing her weight. She was heavier than he remembered. Or perhaps it was just the burden of the situation that added mass to her slender frame. The car groaned beneath them. The metal chassis, precariously perched against the fir tree, shifted a few inches in the soft, eroding mud. "We have to move," Lucas said tight near her ear. "Elena, the car is sliding. I need you to hold on to me." "My leg," she gasped, her breath coming in short, white puffs of vapor. Her hands clawed at his soaked dress shirt, bunching the fabric. Her nails dug into his skin, desperate and sharp. "Lucas, it hurts." "I know." He maneuvered her legs carefully, trying to ignore the unnatural angle of her left ankle. "I'm going to lift you. On 3. 1, 2, 3. He heaved her out of the wreckage. The effort strained his back and the sharp edge of the doorframe scraped his ribs, but he didn't stop. He pulled her into the wet embrace of the night. The cold hit them like a physical blow. The sleet had turned into freezing rain, coating everything in a layer of treacherous glaze. Lucas didn't try to climb back up the embankment immediately. It was too steep, too slick, and Elena was dead weight in his arms. Instead, he stumbled toward a cluster of rocks sheltered by the canopy of an ancient cedar, about 10 yards away from the unstable vehicle. He laid her down on the bed of pine needles, stripping off his suit jacket to cover her. It was a futile gesture against the freezing temperatures, but it was all he had. He sat behind her, pulling her back against his chest, wrapping his arms around her to share whatever body heat he had left. For a moment, the world narrowed down to this: the smell of wet pine, the metallic tang of blood, and the rhythmic shuddering of his wife's body against his own. "Julian," Elena mumbled, her consciousness drifting in the shock. Lucas stiffened. The name was a spark landing in a pool of gasoline. "Julian isn't here," Lucas said flat, devoid of comfort. "I am." Elena's head lolled back against his shoulder. Her eyes opened, unfocused, searching the darkness above. He said I was just a bored housewife." Lucas looked down at her. Even in the dim light, he could see the wreckage of her face, the swelling around her eye, the blood matting her hair, but the damage Julian had inflicted with words seemed to be the wound bleeding the most.
"Stop talking, Elena."
"He didn't care,"
she whispered, a tear sliding horizontally across the bridge of her nose.
"I ruined everything. For nothing."
Lucas tightened his grip, not out of affection, but to silence her. He didn't want her confession. He didn't want her epiphany. Not here. Not while he was freezing to death trying to save her from the consequences of her own choices. It felt cheap. It felt like she was trying to offload her guilt onto him, making him carry that too. "Save your breath," Lucas ordered harshly. "Focus on staying awake." A silence fell between them, heavier than the storm. Lucas stared at the mangled BMW below. It was a charcoal monument to their marriage, expensive, flashy, and now destroyed beyond repair. Then, the darkness above shattered. Red and blue lights strobed against the trees, dancing violently across the wet bark. The wail of sirens cut through the wind, getting louder, closer. "Over here!" Lucas roared, flashing his light up toward the road. "Down here!" Voices shouted back. Beams of powerful flashlights swept the embankment. Men in yellow reflective gear began to descend with ropes and stretchers, moving with practiced efficiency. The moment the paramedics reached them, Lucas felt a strange sensation.
Relief, yes, but also a loss of purpose. "Sir, step back, we got her," a paramedic shouted over the wind, kneeling beside Elena. Lucas uncoiled his arms and stood up. His legs were numb. He watched as they put a collar on her neck, cut open her dress to check for internal bleeding, and strapped her to the backboard. They were efficient, clinical, and impersonal. They touched her with professional indifference, a stark contrast to the violent intimacy of the last 20 minutes. "Are you the husband?" another paramedic asked, shining a light in Lucas's eyes to check for shock. "Yes," Lucas said. The word tasted like ash. "You riding with us?" "Yes." The ascent was a blur of winches and shouting. Once they were in the back of the ambulance, the doors slammed shut, sealing out the storm and the noise. The sudden silence was jarring. The interior was brightly lit, smelling of antiseptic and latex, the smell of crisis management. Lucas sat on the small bench to the side, his wet shirt clinging to his skin. He watched the paramedic work. IV lines were established, vitals were called out. BP 90/60, tachycardic, possible tibia fracture, head trauma. Elena was drifting in and out now. The pain medication they had pushed was taking the edge off her panic, replacing it with a glassy-eyed stupor. She reached out, her hand flapping blindly in the air until it found the edge of the stretcher. "Lucas?" The paramedic looked at Lucas. "She's asking for you." Lucas looked at her hand. It was covered in mud and dried blood. Her wedding ring was missing. He remembered she had taken it off before she left the apartment. She had put it in the crystal bowl on the entryway table. He reached out and took her hand. It was a reflex, muscle memory. Elena's fingers curled around his weakly. She turned her head, her eyes locking onto his. In the harsh fluorescent light, there were no shadows to hide in. "I'm sorry," she rasped. The words were slurred, but the intent was clear. "I'm so sorry." Lucas looked at her. He felt the vibration of the ambulance engine beneath his feet. He saw the blood pressure monitor cycling again. He wanted to say it was okay. That was the script. That was what a good husband did in the movies. He forgives the dying wife. He absolves her. But Lucas Vance dealt in realities. And the reality was she wasn't dying. She was going to live. And he was going to have to live with the memory of those 18 calls. "Rest, Elena," Lucas said quietly. He didn't say, "I forgive you." He didn't say, "I love you." He just held her hand, feeling the pulse in her wrist, steady, strong, and completely separate from his own. The ambulance slowed, turning sharply. The lights of the hospital emergency bay washed over the rear windows. "We're here," the paramedic announced. The doors flew open. The noise of the city rushed in. Lucas let go of her hand.
The emergency room waiting area at Harborview Medical Center was a world of harsh fluorescent light, pale green linoleum, and the persistent low thrum of controlled chaos. It was clean, but the cleanliness was purely clinical, scrubbed free of comfort and empathy. Lucas stood near the intake desk, his soaked clothes steaming faintly in the warmth. He gave his name, Elena's name, and their insurance information with the practiced efficiency of someone filing a damage report. He spoke to the intake nurse, a woman named Clara with tired eyes and a pen tucked behind her ear, as if discussing a delayed flight rather than a near-fatal crisis. "And the nature of the relationship?" Clara asked, tapping on her keyboard. "She's my wife," Lucas replied, the phrase feeling like a relic from another era. "I understand, but was she involved in the incident? Were you in the car?" "No, I received a distress call and located her. She was a solo occupant, single-vehicle accident in the pass area." Lucas omitted the details of the 18 calls, the voicemail, and the abandoned cabin. Those details were the private collateral damage of their marriage, not necessary for the police report. Clara nodded, printing a wristband for Lucas. "Family contact. They've taken her to Trauma Bay 3. We'll move her to diagnostic imaging shortly. Please take a seat, Mr. Vance." Lucas walked to the designated waiting area.
He bypassed the stained vinyl couches and chose a single molded plastic chair in a corner, positioning himself with his back to the wall. He was a sentinel, not a relative. The immediate adrenaline of the rescue had ebbed, leaving behind a profound emptiness. He was no longer the hero, he was the bystander. He ran a hand over his face. The water was cold, the fabric of his shirt clinging to his chest like a shroud. He felt the dull ache in his shoulder where he'd impacted the tree. Now, with time to breathe, the psychological details of the night rushed back, crowding his mind like aggressive squatters. The smell of Julian's cologne on Elena's neck, the casual cruelty of the man's abandonment, Elena's own shriek, "It's not your business where I go." Lucas had spent the last 3 hours fighting gravity and weather to save the life of a woman who had consciously decided she didn't want him. He had fulfilled his marital vow, in sickness and in disaster, but the core contract of their union was broken beyond repair. He had saved her body, but the act felt like an ultimate self-inflicted wound to his soul. He found himself scrutinizing every person who entered the waiting room. He was waiting for a ghost. He was waiting for Julian. He pictured the confrontation. Julian, handsome and disheveled, rushing in with performative panic, perhaps a superficial cut on his own hand. He imagined the conversation. "Is Elena okay? I rushed right back." "No, Julian, you didn't. You left her bleeding in a ditch." He rehearsed the punch he wanted to throw, feeling the familiar grounding force of his knuckles connecting with bone. He needed that violence to exorcise the image of the coward abandoning his wife. He waited, his jaw clenched, ready to reclaim his dignity. But Julian never came. Of course he didn't. Julian was in Vancouver, or he was asleep in his cabin assuming the architect would take care of the mess. Julian was an illusionist, disappearing when the lights came on. The young resident, dressed in ill-fitting blue scrubs, approached Lucas. He looked barely old enough to shave. "Mr. Vance." Lucas stood up straight. "Yes?" "I'm Dr. Chen. Your wife, Elena. She's stable. That's the good news." He consulted his clipboard. "She took a nasty fall. We've confirmed a commonly noted fracture of her left tibia, a complex break. We're concerned about internal bruising, but initial CT scans are clear of major head trauma. She's hypothermic, obviously, but we're warming her up."
"The leg?" Lucas asked. "It will require surgery. Orthopedic team is prepping now. She'll be in the OR within the hour. It's serious, but fixable. A long road to recovery, but she'll walk again." Dr. Chen paused, sensing the emotional void emanating from Lucas. "You did well, getting her out so fast. It was critical." Lucas merely nodded. Fixable. Elena's leg was fixable. Their marriage was not. "Can I see her?" "Briefly. She's being moved now. Bay 3, just down the hall." Lucas walked down the hallway, the rubber soles of his wet shoes squeaking on the sterile floor. He found her being gently transferred from the trauma stretcher to a gurney. She was draped in thick, thermal blankets. Her face, now cleaned of mud and mascara, looked childlike and fragile beneath the oxygen mask. She saw him and her eyes widened slightly above the plastic. She tried to raise her hand, but a nurse gently restrained her. Lucas walked to the side of the gurney, his reflection visible in the polished steel railing. He looked like a drowned man. Elena's voice, filtered through the mask, was a faint, breathy plea. Don't leave." The word leave hung between them, heavy with irony. She had used it as a weapon 3 hours ago. Now it was a lifeline. Lucas looked at her, searching for the defiant woman who had owned her mistake. But this was only pain, fear, and dependency. He leaned down. "I'm not leaving," he promised. But the promise was technical, not emotional. "I'll be here when you get out of surgery. I'll notify your family, and then we'll talk." He stepped back as the orderlies began to wheel her down the corridor toward the operating suites. He watched her go, the gurney disappearing behind the heavy double doors labeled "Surgery, Staff Only." Lucas felt the profound, chilling weight of his obligation. He had saved her life, thereby guaranteeing he would now have to participate in the slow, agonizing death of their marriage. He pulled his phone from his trousers. The screen was still displaying the 18 missed calls and the horrifying voicemail. He deleted the voicemail first. It had served its purpose. He didn't want to hear her voice begging again. Then he opened his contact list. He scrolled past Alina's colleagues, past his own partners, and stopped at a name he hadn't called in years, Patricia, Alina's mom. It was 4:38 a.m. Time to break the news. Time to involve the outside world in the wreckage. He pressed the call button, listening to the soft, distant ringing. The first chasm of light was just beginning to appear over the western mountains, weak and watery, promising a miserable dawn.
The clock on the dashboard read 5:15 a.m. when Lucas's SUV pulled into the parking garage beneath the Vance penthouse. The sky, just starting to bleed weak, pearlescent gray over the Puget Sound, offered no comfort. He had made the call from the hospital lobby. Patricia, Elena's mother, had answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep and instant anxiety. Lucas had delivered the news. Blunt, concise, and professionally sterile. "She's stable, Patricia. Single vehicle accident near Snoqualmie. Broken leg, hypothermia. She's going into surgery now. I'll keep you updated." He omitted the phrase, "near Julian's cabin." He omitted, "she screamed at me." He omitted 18 panic calls. He had constructed a solid, defensible narrative, a terrible accident caused by poor weather and slick roads. It was the last bitter act of protection he owed his wife. Patricia had dissolved into weeping cliches and sharp, fragmented questions. He had answered them all with mechanical patience, promising to stay, promising to call. The performance had exhausted him more than wrestling the BMW from the embankment. Now he was home. The garage was silent, the concrete columns rising around him like the columns of a forgotten temple. He rode the elevator up, watching his reflection in the mirrored stainless steel doors. He looked like an architect who had just spent 5 hours wrestling with the ruin of his own design, haggard, mud-stained, and fundamentally broken. He opened the penthouse door. The air inside was still heavy with the scent of Guerlain perfume and unresolved fury. The silence was not peaceful, it was a negative space, a vacuum where a marriage used to be. The scene of their argument was perfectly preserved. The kitchen was pristine, except for the tiny wet smudge on the granite where his dishcloth had rested hours ago. The entryway table held the two most damning relics: Elena's discarded car key fob, she must have used Julian's car key for the BMW, and nestled in the crystal bowl, her gold wedding band. Lucas stared at the ring. It was a simple, tasteful band engraved on the inside with her anniversary date. It lay there, gleaming innocently, a perfect circle representing an imperfect, fractured commitment. She hadn't left it in anger. She had left it to be free. She hadn't wanted the burden of his ring when she went to her lover. He picked it up. It was cold. He clenched his fist around the tiny, fragile symbol. He didn't feel rage. He felt a weary, final understanding. This was the moment the marriage truly ended. The physical structure was gone, leaving only the foundation exposed. His immediate mission was practical: clothes, a charger, and his laptop. Elena would need her phone charger, toiletries, and some distraction. He walked into their bedroom. The light outside was strong enough now to chase away the deep shadows. He went to her side of the walk-in closet. Elena's clothes hung in precise order: expensive silk blouses, structured designer suits for her PR work, and an array of delicate lingerie. He pulled a small suitcase from the top shelf and began packing, selecting items with clinical detachment: a pair of soft cashmere sweatpants, a plain white cotton shirt, for comfort, not style, and her necessary skincare products. He didn't pick up the new black lace lingerie that had arrived 2 weeks ago, a silent physical indication of her infidelity that now felt obscene. He found her journal beneath a stack of magazines. It was a leather-bound, untouched volume that she had received for Christmas 3 years ago. Lucas frowned. Elena didn't keep a diary. She kept her life meticulously curated. He picked it up. It felt heavy. He ran his thumb across the spine, feeling a sudden invasive urge to open it. Was it a diary, or had she simply left it there to make me believe she was introspective? He didn't open it. Lucas Vance built his life on facts, not speculation. He set the journal back down. The truth of her actions, the lie, the scream, the abandonment, was etched too deeply in the last few hours to require textual evidence.
He grabbed his own things: a clean charcoal suit, a fresh shirt, and his laptop bag. He paused by the bed, looking at the smooth, undisturbed duvet. He had slept on top of it, fully clothed, waiting for her return. He looked at his own reflection in the long mirror on the closet door, the architect of his life standing in the wreckage, surrounded by the debris of ambition and betrayal.
He left the apartment carrying 2 bags, one for himself, containing the uniform of his professional life, one for Elena, containing the soft, practical garments of her dependency. Downstairs, Lucas stood in the hospital hallway near the surgery wing. The surgery had begun. He sat back down in the uncomfortable plastic chair, now strangely comforting in its hard neutrality. He opened his laptop, planning to lose himself in the familiar, rigorous world of structural design, cross-sections, and load calculations. He pulled up the digital blueprint for a new commercial tower his firm was pitching, a complex, ambitious design of interlocking, cantilevered levels. He stared at the lines, the perfect symmetry, the mathematical certainty of it all. He scrolled to the foundation schematic. It showed the deep concrete piles anchoring the structure to the bedrock. He looked away from the screen and rubbed his tired eyes. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he could build a skyscraper that would withstand a magnitude 9 earthquake, but he couldn't repair his own foundation. He looked at Elena's bag beside him, then at his phone. The 18 missed calls were still listed in the log, no longer a source of rage, but a chilling reminder of who she turned to when the illusion failed. He was the safe harbor, the emergency beacon, but never the desired destination. He realized his first action when he returned to the penthouse would be to call a divorce lawyer. The surgery would save her life. His decision would save his. He closed the laptop, the sudden sound echoing in the empty hall. He had 6 hours of waiting ahead of him, 6 hours to plan his exit.
3 days later, Elena was transferred from the recovery floor to a private room overlooking the city. The fractured tibia had been stabilized with plates and screws, a metallic architecture designed to mimic Lucas's own professional certainty. Lucas was still there. He hadn't slept at the penthouse. He had checked into a small, anonymous hotel downtown, spending his days shuttling between the hospital and his office for only the most critical meetings. He was running on coffee, obligation, and the cold, crystalline clarity of a man who had made a decision. He handled the logistics of her life with remote precision, coordinating with Patricia, who flew in from San Diego, demanding constant updates and discreetly weeping, dealing with the insurance adjusters regarding the totaled BMW, and informing Elena's PR firm that she would be on indefinite medical leave. He was her caretaker, her chief of staff, and her jailer, all without being her husband. Patricia was the first to notice the sterile distance. "Lucas, darling," she whispered, pulling him aside while Elena slept under the effect of mild narcotics. "You saved her life. You are a hero. But you look like you're waiting for the bank to open."
"I am waiting for clarity, Patricia," Lucas had replied, his voice flat. "And the bank is always open. It just depends on what currency you want to transact in." Patricia had looked confused, then worried. She quickly retreated, sensing the iron curtain Lucas had drawn around himself. On the afternoon of the 4th day, Elena was lucid, pale, and heavily sedated, but coherent enough for the conversation Lucas had been dreading and planning since the ambulance ride. Patricia had finally gone to the hotel to shower and rest. They were alone. The hospital room was quiet save for the rhythmic beeping of the monitoring equipment. The winter sun, finally breaking through the ubiquitous Seattle clouds, streamed weakly through the blinds, casting stripes of light and shadow across the bed. Elena was propped up, her left leg immobilized and elevated. She watched him, her eyes dark with knowledge and fear. Lucas sat in the visitor's chair, his posture rigid. He didn't offer a platitude. He just opened the conversation with a factual statement they both knew was true. "Julian never came to the hospital, Elena." The name hung in the air, cold and hard. Elena winced, but not from physical pain. "I know," she whispered, her voice still weak. "I tried to call him, but he blocked me." "He was gone, Elena," he corrected her, "before the paramedics got to you. He drove away knowing you were off the road. He left you to freeze or bleed out.
He traded your life for his anonymity. Elena turned her head away, staring at the window. I realized that when I was trapped in the car. I realized I called the wrong man first. I called the illusion. But you called me second, Lucas finished, his tone neither kind nor accusatory, merely stating the sequence of events. 18 times. She turned back to him, tears welling up in her eyes. Tears of genuine regret, not the manufactured tears of a PR crisis. I am so sorry, Lucas. Truly, I'm sorry for the lie, for him, for what I said to you. She struggled to sit up further, reaching out a hand, but the action sent a jolt of pain through her, and she collapsed back onto the pillow. It was stupid. I was drowning, and I tried to grab a piece of driftwood. I hated that I needed you, but you were the only solid thing I could think of. You saved me. Lucas didn't flinch. He looked at her confession like an engineer inspecting a failed stress test. I did save you. That's not up for debate. I fulfilled my duty, Elena. As your husband, I swore to protect you, and I did. I pulled you out of that metal box. He leaned forward, placing his hands on his knees. But when I was driving up that mountain, I had hours to think about the calculus of our marriage, about the fundamental structure. He pulled the wedding ring from his jacket pocket. It had been warming against his skin for days. He placed it gently on the bedside table, next to the remote control and a disposable plastic cup. It gleamed faintly under the sterile light.
You took this off before you left the apartment, he said. You wanted to be free of me when you went to him. When I found it, I realized the foundational contract was already void. You signed the divorce papers when you slammed the door. Elena stared at the ring, then back at Lucas, her face a mask of shock and devastation. Lucas, please, don't do this. Not now. I'm broken. We can fix this. I've learned my lesson. I was lost. I need you. I need you to forgive me. The word hung there, forgive, the ultimate currency of their relationship. Lucas closed his eyes briefly, gathering the immense emotional strength required to deliver the final verdict. Forgiveness isn't a bandage L. It's not a quick fix for a complex fracture. It's a complete reconstruction of trust that takes years, and I don't have the will or the design resources to rebuild it. He looked at her, his expression sorrowful but firm. I promised I wouldn't leave you, and I won't. I will see you through this recovery. I will ensure your medical care is flawless. I will set up your physical therapy. I will make sure you walk again without a limp. But I will not be your husband. Elena's lips trembled. The strength of the narcotics couldn't dull the seismic shock of his words. You can't. After all this, you can't just throw 7 years away. You threw it away, Elena. You screamed at me that our life was not your business. You were right. You decided our life wasn't your business anymore. My business now is rebuilding my own structure. He stood up, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. He looked down at the pale, broken woman who is technically still his wife. I'm setting up a separate fund for your recovery costs that falls outside the marital assets. I will also be sleeping at the apartment tonight to clear out my personal effects. I have already contacted an attorney. They will contact yours once you're physically well enough to deal with the paperwork. Elena didn't scream this time. She didn't argue. She just stared at the ring on the bedside table and let out a single soundless sob. The silence of the sterile room was the final devastating echo of the phone calls he had refused to answer hours ago. Lucas turned and walked toward the door.
6 weeks after the crash, the Seattle sky was still stubbornly gray, but the rain had stopped. Elena was home, settled into the guest suite on the lower floor of the penthouse where the stairs wouldn't mock her new reliance on crutches. Lucas had orchestrated her transition with the same meticulous care he devoted to complex construction projects. He hired a private nurse for the first 2 weeks, coordinated physical therapy sessions, and ensured the apartment's smart home system was adapted to her limited mobility. He had built a fortress around her convalescence, designed for comfort but fundamentally lacking warmth. He was still living at his small downtown hotel, only returning to the penthouse during designated hours, when Patricia was present or when he needed to check the security system.
The few times they were alone, the silence was vast and unbearable, punctuated only by the clock of her crutches on the marble floor. Elena was physically recovering, but emotionally she was a ruin. The glamour, the sharp ambition, the caustic wit, it was all gone, stripped away by the betrayal of her lover and the quiet rejection of her husband. She watched Lucas from across the room, her eyes following his movements as he consulted the physical therapist or checked the orthopedic cast. She looked at him not with the contempt she'd shown that night, but with a desperate, painful recognition. He was stability, he was truth, and she had traded him for a phantom. The final confrontation occurred on a Tuesday afternoon. Patricia had left for the airport, having exhausted her supply of concerned motherly advice. Lucas was loading his final boxes, a collection of architectural sketches and awards, into the elevator. Elena intercepted him in the hallway, leaning heavily on her crutches, her face pale but determined. "Lucas," she called out. He stopped, his hand resting on the elevator call button. He turned, giving him his full guarded attention. "I know what you said in the hospital, and you're right. I threw it all away. I shattered the foundation. I deserved to be left in that car." "Don't say that, Elle." Lucas interrupted, his expression softening momentarily, betraying the barest hint of the man he used to be. "No one deserves that." "But I deserved your contempt," she insisted, pushing forward with the pain. "I took the most solid thing in my life, your loyalty, and treated it like a liability. I hated that you were so good because it meant I couldn't be. And Julian, he was chaos. He allowed me to be chaos." She stopped, resting her weight heavily on her forearms, her breath catching in her throat. "I only have one question," she whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "When you were pulling me out of the car, before the police came, when I was begging you, did you hate me? Did you ever, for a second, consider letting me go?" Lucas looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the genuine remorse, the stripped-down vulnerability that years of marriage and layers of ambition had concealed. He also remembered the overwhelming surge of anger when he smelled the whiskey and tobacco on her clothes. He knew that the answer he gave now would be the final sentence of their shared history. "No, Elena," he said slowly, choosing each word with the gravity of setting stone. "I didn't hate you. I didn't think about letting you go." He paused, his gaze drifting away from her face to the clean lines of the apartment, the home they had designed together.
"I thought about the structure. I thought about the oaths I took. I swore to protect you, regardless of the conditions. I risked my life to save your body because that was the code I live by. I secured the site, Elle. I didn't do it because I loved you the way I used to. I did it because I was the only reliable architect you had left." He met her gaze again, his expression melancholy, final. "And once the body was safe, the code was fulfilled. Now I have to demolish the marriage. It's no longer structurally sound, and trying to patch it up would only lead to a greater collapse later on." Elena stared at him, absorbing the cold, rational judgment. It was the most honest, least forgiving answer he could have given. It was Lucas. She didn't beg, she didn't cry out. She simply nodded once, a gesture of painful acceptance. "I hope you find peace, Lucas," she murmured. "And I hope you find stability, Elena, and something less ephemeral than chaos." He pressed the elevator button. The doors opened with a soft chime. He dragged his boxes in, the sound of the cardboard scraping the floor echoing loudly in the spacious hall. Lucas stepped into the elevator car, turning to face his wife for the last time. Elena stood motionless in the middle of the hallway, a solitary figure dwarfed by the luxurious space, leaning heavily on her crutches. The wedding ring still sat on the bedside table in the guest room, gleaming faintly in the afternoon light. The doors slid closed, silencing the past. As the elevator descended, Lucas didn't look back at the 18th floor. He looked at the reflection in the polished steel, seeing a man who was bruised, tired, but finally free of a foundation that had been actively working to betray him. He was ready to start the final blueprint, the design of a solitary, honest life. The echo of the 2:17 a.m. panic calls had finally faded, replaced by the quiet hum of his own solitude.